The biting wind howled through the narrow streets of Breckenridge, Colorado, as Zara Kessler stumbled through knee-deep snow, her fingers numb and her face stinging from the brutal cold of the January night. The blizzard had descended without warning, transforming the peaceful mining town into a treacherous white prison, and Zara had made the fatal mistake of stepping outside to retrieve a package that had been delivered to the wrong address, her landlady's home next door. It was 1878, and winter in the Colorado Rockies showed no mercy to the unprepared. Zara had only meant to be gone for a moment, wearing nothing but her thin cotton dress and a woolen shawl that now hung heavy with moisture around her shoulders. The wind had seized her door the instant she'd stepped away, slamming it shut with a decisive click that sealed her fate. The spare key she normally kept hidden beneath a rock was buried somewhere beneath the mounting snowdrifts, and her landlady had departed that morning for Denver, leaving her completely alone. "Hello," she called out, her voice immediately swallowed by the roaring storm. "Is anyone there? Please help me." Panic surged through her veins as she pounded desperately on her door. The temperature was plummeting rapidly, and she knew what happened to people caught in mountain blizzards. She'd been in Breckenridge for less than 3 months, having fled St. Louis and a marriage proposal from a man her father had selected, a man who had made her skin crawl whenever he'd touched her hand. She had come west seeking freedom and a new beginning, but she hadn't anticipated dying alone in the snow before her 23rd birthday. Zara tried the window, but it was latched from the inside. Her fingers were losing sensation, and her teeth chattered so violently she feared they might crack. She needed shelter soon, or she wouldn't survive the night. Gathering what remained of her strength, she trudged toward the only building showing signs of life, the saloon at the end of the street, its windows glowing with warm light that promised salvation. The distance seemed impossible, each step through the deepening snow draining her remaining energy. When she finally reached the weathered porch, she collapsed against the door, summoning the last of her strength to knock. Inside the warmth of the Gold Nugget saloon, Declan Yates knocked back another whiskey, barely registering the burn as it slid down his throat. He'd spent 10 long years as a Texas Ranger before trading his badge for a life of wandering, and tonight marked 3 weeks since he'd arrived in Breckenridge. He wasn't sure why he'd stopped here. Perhaps it was the mountains that reminded him of the home he'd left behind in New Mexico. Or maybe it was simply that his horse had needed rest. Whatever the reason, he hadn't intended to stay, but then the snows had come, trapping him in this mining town until the pass cleared. "Another?" asked the barkeep, eyeing the empty glass. Declan nodded, pushing it forward. "Much obliged." The saloon was quiet tonight, most men having had the sense to stay home as the blizzard raged. Only a few hardened miners remained, playing cards in the corner, and a piano player tapping out a melancholy tune that suited Declan's mood. At 32, he had seen enough violence and heartbreak to last several lifetimes. The scars on his body told stories he preferred not to share, and the ones on his heart he kept buried even deeper. A faint sound caught his attention, a weak rapping at the door that could have been mistaken for the wind rattling the timbers. But Declan's years of tracking outlaws had honed his senses, and something about the rhythm struck him as deliberate. "Someone's at the door," he said, rising from his stool. The barkeep shrugged. "Probably just the wind. Nobody's fool enough to be out in this storm." But Declan was already moving, his instincts driving him forward. He crossed the room in long strides, unbolted the heavy wooden door, and pulled it open against the resistance of the wind. A woman collapsed into his arms, her skin as pale as the snow that clung to her soaked dress and hair. Her lips were blue, her eyes unfocused, and she weighed almost nothing as he caught her. "Good Lord," he breathed, lifting her easily. "Barkeep, hot water and blankets now." The saloon erupted into activity as Declan carried the half-frozen woman to the fire. Her eyelids fluttered as he set her gently in a chair, her gaze momentarily clearing as it met his. "Thank you," she whispered through chattering teeth. "Don't thank me yet," Declan replied, removing his heavy sheepskin coat and wrapping it around her trembling shoulders. "We need to get you warm before frostbite sets in. What's your name, miss?" "Zara," she managed, her voice barely audible. "Zara Kessler. I'm Declan Yates." He rubbed her arms through the coat, trying to restore circulation. "What in heaven's name were you doing out in this storm?" "I got locked out," she said, a hint of color returning to her cheeks as the fire's warmth began to reach her. "My door slammed shut. The wind. I couldn't get back in." The barkeep returned with a steaming mug of coffee laced with whiskey and a pile of rough blankets. Declan took them with a nod of thanks, wrapping the blankets around Zara's legs and helping her hold the mug. "Drink this," he instructed. "It'll warm you from the inside." She took a sip and immediately coughed as the whiskey burned her throat, but she didn't protest, recognizing the medicine for what it was. As she drank, Declan assessed her condition with experienced eyes. Her fingertips were white, but not the deadly gray-blue of severe frostbite. Her face was reddened from the cold, but with proper warming she would recover. What concerned him most was the wet clothing beneath his coat and the blankets. "Miss Kessler, forgive my forwardness, but you need dry clothes," he said quietly. "That wet dress will suck the heat right out of you, no matter how many blankets we pile on." A flash of alarm crossed her features, and he quickly added, "Mrs. Sullivan has rooms upstairs. She'll have something you can change into." Relief washed over her face, followed by embarrassment at her reaction. "Of course. Thank you, Mr. Yates." Declan nodded to the barkeep, who disappeared up the stairs to fetch the saloon owner's wife. While they waited, Declan continued to rub Zara's arms and legs through the blankets, encouraging blood flow while keeping a respectful distance. "Where are you staying?" he asked. "A boarding house on Pine Street," she replied, her voice steadier now. "Mrs. Holloway's place." "The blue house with the white trim." When she nodded, Declan continued, "That's a fair walk in this weather. You're lucky you made it here alive." "I'm beginning to realize that," she admitted, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The terror of her near-death experience was still evident in her gaze. Mrs. Sullivan appeared, a stout woman with kind eyes and a practical manner. She took one look at Zara and clucked her tongue in disapproval. "Mercy, child, you're half frozen. Come upstairs with me. I've got a nightgown and robe that'll do until we can dry your things." She looked at Declan. "The girl can stay in the empty room tonight. No sense in trying to get her home in this." Declan nodded his agreement. "I'll fetch her things from Mrs. Holloway's place tomorrow once the storm passes." "My door is locked," Zara said, her brow furrowing with worry. "That's why I'm in this mess." "Don't you fret about that," Declan said with a confidence that came from years of experience. "I can get you back in, Mrs. Sullivan helped Zara to her feet, supporting her as they made their way toward the stairs. At the last moment, Zara turned back, her gaze finding Declan's across the room. "Mr. Yates, thank you. I would have died out there if not for you." Something stirred in Declan's chest, an unfamiliar warmth that had nothing to do with the whiskey he'd consumed. He tipped his hat slightly, a gesture so ingrained he scarcely noticed doing it. "Just doing what anyone would do, Miss Kessler." As she disappeared up the stairs, Declan returned to the bar, his mind still filled with the image of her face as it had first appeared in the doorway, delicate features framed by dark hair streaked with snow, eyes the color of a summer storm. He ordered another whiskey and found himself hoping the blizzard would last a few days longer. Morning broke clear and cold, the storm having spent its fury during the night. Sunlight sparkled across the pristine snow that blanketed Breckenridge, transforming the mining town into a glistening wonderland. Zara awoke in an unfamiliar room, momentarily disoriented until the events of the previous night came flooding back. She sat up slowly, her muscles aching from her ordeal. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Sullivan's entrance, the older woman carrying a tray with steaming coffee and a bowl of porridge. "Good morning, dear. I thought you might be hungry." "Thank you," Zara said gratefully, accepting the tray. "You've been so kind." "Nonsense. Anyone would do the same." Mrs. Sullivan bustled about the small room, opening the curtains to let in the morning light. "Your dress is nearly dry. It's hanging by the kitchen fire. That young man who brought you in, Mr. Yates, he's already gone to see about your door." Zara felt a flutter in her stomach at the mention of Declan Yates. In the harsh light of day, her memories of him seemed almost dreamlike, strong arms catching her as she fell, gentle hands wrapping her in his coat, a deep voice promising safety. "He didn't have to do that," she murmured, sipping the coffee. "From what I gather, that man's not one to leave a job half done," Mrs. Sullivan replied with a knowing smile. "He's been staying here about 3 weeks now, keeps to himself mostly, but I've never seen him pass by someone in need." Zara ate her breakfast slowly, savoring the warmth and nourishment after her harrowing experience. By the time she'd finished, Mrs. Sullivan had returned with her dress, now dry but terribly wrinkled. "It'll have to do until we can get you home," the older woman said apologetically. Dressed in her own clothes once more, Zara made her way downstairs to find the saloon transformed by daylight. Without the haze of smoke and the clamor of drunken men, it was simply a large room with a long bar, several tables, and a small stage where a piano sat silent. Mr. Sullivan was sweeping the floor, and he nodded politely as she appeared. "Your rescuer should be back soon," he informed her. "Said he'd return before noon." As if summoned by the words, the door swung open, bringing with it a blast of cold air and the impressive figure of Declan Yates. Snow dusted his broad shoulders, and his cheeks were ruddy from the cold, but his eyes were warm as they found her across the room. "Miss Kessler," he greeted, removing his hat. "Glad to see you looking better this morning." "Mr. Yates," she replied, suddenly conscious of her rumpled appearance. "I understand I have you to thank yet again. Mrs. Sullivan says you went to check on my door." "I did." He crossed to where she stood, his movements fluid despite his size. Up close, she could see the weathered lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent outdoors, and a thin scar that ran along his jawline, barely visible beneath the stubble of his beard. "I'm afraid I have both good news and bad news." Zara steeled herself. "Let's have the bad news first. Your door is indeed locked tight, and there's no way to slip the latch from outside." She sighed, resigned. "And the good news," a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, transforming his stern features. "I can break it down and fix it afterward. I was a carpenter's apprentice before I became a ranger." "A Texas Ranger?" Zara asked, impressed despite herself. She had heard stories about these legendary lawmen even in St. Louis. He nodded, a shadow briefly crossing his face. "For 10 years, but that's behind me now." There was a story there, she could sense it, but it wasn't her place to pry. Instead, she focused on the practical matter at hand. "Breaking down my door seems rather extreme, Mr. Yates." "Call me Declan," he said, "and it's not as dramatic as it sounds. I'll remove the hinges first, and once we're in, I'll repair any damage. Mrs. Holloway won't even know the difference." Zara hesitated, considering her options. She had no family in town, few friends close enough to impose upon, and limited funds for an extended stay at the hotel. Her landlady wouldn't return for at least another week, and all her possessions, including her money and warmer clothing, were locked inside her room. Very well. Declan, she conceded, testing his name. When can we attempt this burglary? His smile widened, revealing straight white teeth. No time like the present. Mr. Sullivan has lent me a sled to help navigate the snow. We can collect my tools from my room at the boarding house and head to your place straight away. The walk through town was slow going, the snow still deep, despite the efforts of shopkeepers who had begun to clear paths in front of their establishments. Declan pulled the sled, upon which he had secured his toolbox, and insisted Zara ride when the snow became too deep for her to comfortably walk through. She had protested at first, embarrassed at being pulled like a child, but the practical advantages soon outweighed her pride. "Have you been in Breckenridge long?" Declan asked as they made their way down the main street. "Only since October," she replied, steadying herself as the sled bumped over a hidden rock. "Just before the first snow. What brought you all the way from?" He paused, studying her. "Let me guess. Somewhere back east, Boston, perhaps?" "St. Louis," she corrected, impressed by his perception. "Is it that obvious?" he chuckled, the sound deep and pleasant. "Your accent gives you away, and those shoes weren't made for Colorado winters." Zara glanced down at her impractical leather boots, now thoroughly ruined by the snow and water. "I'm learning that the hard way. As for what brought me here," she hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to this stranger who had saved her life but was still, nevertheless, a stranger. "You don't have to tell me," he said quickly, sensing her discomfort. "We all come west for our reasons." "No, it's all right," she decided. There was something about Declan Yates that inspired confidence. "I came to teach. The town advertised for a schoolteacher, and I had the qualifications. It seemed like an adventure, and I needed a change." She didn't mention her father's rage when she'd refused the marriage proposal, or the bruises his fingers had left on her arm when he tried to force her compliance. She didn't speak of sneaking away in the night with only what she could carry, or the terrible fear that he would follow her. Some stories were better left untold. "A schoolteacher," Declan repeated, nodding as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. "That explains the way you speak. Very proper." "Is that a compliment or a criticism, Mr. Yates?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Declan," he reminded her, "and it's neither, just an observation." They arrived at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, a two-story blue structure with white trim, just as Declan had remembered. The path to the door had been partially cleared, suggesting that the other tenants had made it home safely before the worst of the storm. "Which room is yours?" Declan asked, helping Zara from the sled. "Second floor, end of the hall," she directed. The door with the small wreath still hanging on it. They trudged up the snow-covered stairs to the porch, and Zara led the way inside, grateful that the front door remained unlocked during daylight hours. The interior was quiet, most of the residents likely at work now that the storm had passed. Upstairs, they found her door exactly as she had left it, firmly shut and unforgivingly locked. Declan set down his toolbox and examined the hinges with a critical eye. "This won't be too difficult," he assessed. "Stand back a bit if you would." Zara complied, watching with curiosity as he selected several tools and began to work. His hands were large but remarkably deft, removing the pins from the hinges with practiced ease. Once they were free, he positioned himself against the door. "Ready?" he asked. At her nod, he applied steady pressure, pushing the door inward from the hinge side. There was a moment of resistance, then a cracking sound as the door gave way, still attached at the lock but now open enough for them to enter. "There we are," Declan said with satisfaction, stepping back to allow Zara to enter first. The room was exactly as she had left it, neat and orderly, with a small bed, a writing desk, and a wardrobe containing her modest collection of clothing. The package she had been attempting to retrieve for Mrs. Holloway still sat on her neighbor's porch, forgotten in the chaos of the previous night. "Home, sweet home," she said, relief washing over her. "I can't thank you enough, Declan." He waved away her gratitude, already examining the damage to the door frame. "This is an easy fix. I'll have it good as new before supper." While Declan worked, Zara built a fire in the small stove, grateful for the warmth as it began to fill the chilled room. She then changed into dry, clean clothing behind a privacy screen, emerging in a sensible blue dress that was far better suited to the Colorado winter than the one she had been wearing. "You can set your coat here to dry," she offered, noticing that the shoulders of his sheepskin coat were still damp from the snow. "It's the least I can do, considering it kept me from freezing to death last night." Declan hesitated, then removed the coat and handed it to her. Beneath it, he wore a simple flannel shirt that stretched across broad shoulders, revealing the strength that came from years of hard work. Zara hung the coat near the stove, trying not to stare at the way his shirt sleeves rolled up revealed muscular forearms as he worked. "Have you always been good with your hands?" she asked, then immediately flushed at how the question sounded. If Declan noticed her embarrassment, he was kind enough not to comment. "My father was a carpenter," he explained, carefully reattaching the hinges. "He taught me everything he knew before I was 15, said a man should always have a trade to fall back on." "Wise advice," Zara agreed, busying herself with making tea on the stove. "My father was a banker. He wanted sons to follow in his footsteps, but got 3 daughters instead. I was the youngest and the biggest disappointment." Declan looked up from his work, his expression serious. "Any man who sees a daughter as a disappointment doesn't deserve to have children at all." The blunt statement surprised Zara, and she found herself smiling. "I wish you'd told him that. It might have saved me years of trying to earn his approval." "Some people can't give what they don't have in them to give," Declan replied, his attention returning to the door. "I learned that lesson the hard way." Again, Zara sensed a deeper story, but she didn't press. Instead, she prepared 2 cups of tea and brought one to where Declan worked. "It's not much, but it's hot," she said, setting the cup within his reach. "Much obliged." He paused to take a sip, closing his eyes briefly in appreciation. "That hits the spot." They worked in companionable silence for a time, Declan repairing the door, while Zara prepared a simple meal from the supplies in her small pantry. By late afternoon, the door was fixed, swinging smoothly on its hinges with no sign it had ever been damaged. "That's remarkable," Zara said, testing it herself. "You'd never know it had been forced." "Just needed a gentle touch," Declan replied, packing away his tools. Outside, the winter sun was already beginning to set, casting long shadows across the snow-covered street. "Will you stay for supper?" Zara asked impulsively. "It's just bean soup and cornbread, but there's plenty." Declan seemed taken aback by the invitation, and for a moment Zara feared she had overstepped. Then his expression softened. "I'd like that," he said simply. They ate at her small table, the room warmed by the stove and lit by the soft glow of a kerosene lamp. Zara found Declan to be an unexpectedly good conversationalist, despite his initially reserved manner. He told her about his years as a ranger, hunting outlaws along the Texas border, though he glossed over the more violent aspects of the work. In return, she shared stories of her teaching experiences, both in St. Louis and in Breckenridge. "The children here are different," she explained, refilling his tea cup. "In St. Louis, Most of my students were from wealthy families, being educated to maintain their social position. Here, they're learning because they want something better than working the mines or scrubbing floors. Their hunger for knowledge is inspiring. You love teaching, Declan observed. It wasn't a question. I do, she admitted. It's the one thing I've always been certain of. Even when my father insisted it was beneath our family's station, even when he tried to marry me off to. She stopped abruptly, realizing she had said more than intended. Declan's expression darkened. Is that why you came west, running from an unwanted marriage? Zara met his gaze steadily. Yes. My father arranged a match with a business associate, a man 30 years my senior who had already buried 2 wives. When I refused, things became unpleasant. He hurt you. Again, not a question, she looked away. It doesn't matter now, I'm here and he's in St. Louis. It matters, Declan said quietly, his hand clenching on the table. Then, visibly composing himself, he added, but you're right. You're safe now. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, and by the time they finished their meal, the awkwardness had passed. Outside, darkness had fallen completely and fresh snow had begun to drift down. I should head back before it gets worse, Declan said, rising from the table and retrieving his now dry coat. Of course. Zara walked him to the door, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. Thank you again. For everything. Declan paused on the threshold, his tall frame filling the doorway. In the lamplight, his features seemed softer somehow, the hardness of his life momentarily eased. Lock this door behind me, he instructed, and if you ever need help again. I know where to find you, she finished with a smile. He nodded, settling his hat on his head. Good night, Miss Kessler. Zara, she corrected gently. If I'm to call you Declan, then you must call me Zara. A slow smile spread across his face, transforming it entirely. Good night, Zara. She watched from the window as he disappeared into the snowy night, his broad shoulders soon swallowed by the darkness. True to her word, she locked the door securely. But for the first time since arriving in Breckenridge, she didn't immediately feel alone once the latch clicked into place. The next morning dawned bright and cold, the fresh snow from the night before glistening in the winter sunlight. Zara prepared for her day at the schoolhouse, layering her warmest garments beneath her dress and wrapping a thick woolen scarf around her neck. The events of the past 2 days had disrupted her routine, but the school board had decided classes would resume today, giving the children of Breckenridge no additional reprieve from their studies. As she made her way carefully down the cleared streets, Zara found herself scanning the faces of passers-by, half hoping to spot Declan's tall figure among them. She chided herself for the foolishness he had helped her in her time of need, but that didn't mean their paths would continue to cross. Breckenridge wasn't large, but it was big enough that 2 people could easily avoid each other if they chose. The one-room schoolhouse sat on the edge of town, a simple wooden structure with a bell tower and a stone foundation. Inside, Zara found the stove already lit, courtesy of Mr. Peterson, the elderly caretaker who saw to such tasks. The familiar smell of chalk dust and pine floors welcomed her as she removed her outer layers and prepared for her students' arrival. They came in 2s and 3s, their cheeks red from the cold, excited chatter filling the room as they recounted their adventures during the blizzard. Zara listened with a patient smile, gently guiding them to their seats when the final bell rang. Before we begin our lessons, she announced, I want to remind you all how dangerous winter storms can be. I myself had quite an experience during the blizzard. The children leaned forward, eager for a story, and Zara found herself recounting a carefully edited version of her ordeal. She described being locked out and seeking help, emphasizing the importance of preparation and caution during severe weather. What she didn't mention was the warmth of Declan's coat around her shoulders, or the way his eyes had crinkled when he smiled. "Miss Kessler." A small voice broke through her thoughts. It belonged to Emma Blackburn, one of her youngest students at just 6 years old. "Was the man who helped you handsome?" A ripple of giggles swept through the classroom, and Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "That's hardly relevant to our lesson on storm safety, Emma." "But was he?" persisted another child, 10-year-old Joshua Miller. Zara cleared her throat. "Mr. Yates was very kind, which is far more important than appearances. Now, let's open our readers to page 43. The mention of Declan's name sent another wave of whispers through the classroom, and Zara realized her mistake too late. In a town the size of Breckenridge, gossip traveled faster than the stagecoach. "My pa says Mr. Yates used to hunt bad men," offered Thomas Jenkins, his eyes wide. "Says he's the fastest draw in 3 territories." "That's quite enough, Thomas," Zara said firmly. "We're here to learn reading and arithmetic, not to speculate about the townspeople. Now, who can tell me where we left off in our story?" The lessons proceeded normally after that, though Zara noticed several of the girls whispering behind their slates whenever they thought she wasn't looking. By the time the school day ended and the children had been dismissed, she had a pounding headache and a growing sense of unease about how quickly word would spread of her rescue. As she gathered her materials, the schoolhouse door opened, admitting a blast of cold air and the familiar figure of Declan Yates. Zara's heart leaped traitorously in her chest, even as she schooled her features into a composed expression. "Mr. Yates," she greeted him, conscious of several lingering students watching from the schoolyard. "This is a surprise, Miss Kessler." He removed his hat, revealing hair that looked as if he'd run his fingers through it repeatedly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. We've just finished for the day." She gestured to the empty classroom. "What brings you to the schoolhouse?" Declan shifted his weight, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I wanted to check that you were well after your ordeal." "That's very thoughtful," she said, touched by his concern. "I'm quite recovered, thank you." He nodded, his gaze moving around the classroom, taking in the rows of desks, the chalkboard with its half-erased lessons, the books lining the shelves along one wall. "Nice place you have here." "It serves its purpose," Zara replied, watching him curiously. "Did you attend a school like this as a boy?" "For a few years." He moved to examine the map of the United States hanging on the wall. "Until my father died and I had to work. Never got past reading, writing, and basic figures." "That's more education than many receive," Zara said gently, sensing his regret. Declan turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I've been thinking about your door." "My door," she repeated, confused. "It's fixed now, but it could happen again. Winter's far from over, and that latch is prone to catching in the cold." Zara's confusion cleared. "Are you offering to replace it?" "If you'll allow it," he said with a nod. "Wouldn't take more than an afternoon. I've spoken to Mrs. Holloway about it, and she's agreeable." "You've spoken to my landlady?" Zara asked, surprised. A faint color touched Declan's cheeks. "Ran into her this morning. She'd heard about what happened, seems the whole town has, and she was concerned about your well-being. I offered my services." Zara wasn't sure whether to be touched by his thoughtfulness or mortified that her misadventure had become common knowledge so quickly. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose further on your time." "It's no imposition," he assured her. "I've got plenty of time and not much to fill it with until the pass opens." There was something in his voice, a hint of loneliness, perhaps, or a reflection of her own isolation that made Zara's resolve waver. "In that case, I would be grateful for the help. When would you like to begin?" "Tomorrow afternoon," he suggested. "After your teaching duties are complete." That would be perfect. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of children's voices from the schoolyard, gradually fading as they departed for home. Declan replaced his hat, seemingly preparing to leave, but hesitated. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "The town's holding a social on Saturday night at the church hall to celebrate surviving the blizzard, from what I gather." "Yes, I'd heard about it," Zara confirmed, her heart beginning to race. "Mrs. Peterson mentioned it yesterday." Declan cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you might consider attending with me." The invitation hung in the air between them, as delicate and unexpected as the first spring blossom after a hard winter. Zara found herself at a rare loss for words. Accepting would undoubtedly fuel the town gossip, possibly even reaching the ears of the school board, who expected their teacher to maintain an impeccable reputation. Refusing, however, "I would be honored," she heard herself say, the words emerging before she had fully formed her decision. The smile that transformed Declan's face was worth whatever consequences might follow. "I'll call for you at 7 then." "I'll be ready," she promised, returning his smile with one of her own. He left shortly after, and Zara found herself standing alone in the empty classroom, her thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She had come to Breckenridge to escape one man's attention, yet here she was, welcoming another's. But Declan Yates was nothing like the suitor her father had chosen. Where that man had been controlling and cold, Declan was respectful and warm. Where her former suitor had viewed her as a possession to be acquired, Declan seemed to see her as a person to be valued. Still, caution whispered in her ear as she extinguished the lamps and locked the schoolhouse door. She had known Declan for barely 2 days, and what did she really know about him? He had been a Texas Ranger, he was skilled with tools, and he had shown her kindness when she needed it most. But she knew nothing of his past beyond what little he had shared, nothing of his temperament beyond what she had observed in their brief interactions. As she made her way home through the snow, Zara resolved to proceed with care. She would accept Declan's help with the door, attend the social as his companion, but guard her heart until she knew him better. After all, she had come west seeking independence, not to exchange one man's influence for another's. Yet even as she made this resolution, a small, treacherous voice in her mind whispered that it might already be too late. The image of Declan's smile as she had accepted his invitation stayed with her long after she had returned to her room, haunting her dreams with possibilities she dared not yet acknowledge. True to his word, Declan arrived at the boarding house the following afternoon, his toolbox in hand and determination in his step. Zara had just returned from the schoolhouse, her arms laden with students' essays to grade, when she found him already at work removing the old latch from her door. "You didn't wait for me," she observed, setting down her burden on the small writing desk. Declan glanced up, a hint of sheepishness crossing his features. "Thought I'd get started. Hope you don't mind." "Not at all. It gives me time to change into something less formal." She gestured to her high-necked teaching dress, the very picture of propriety. "Would you like some coffee while you work?" "Wouldn't say no to that," he replied, turning his attention back to the door. Zara retreated behind the privacy screen to change into a simpler dress, one she wouldn't mind getting dusty if she helped with the repairs. She could hear Declan working as she changed the soft scrape of tools against wood, the occasional mutter under his breath when something didn't align perfectly. There was something comforting about the sounds, a domesticity she hadn't realized she missed until now. Emerging in a plain blue cotton dress with her hair loosened from its severe teaching bun, Zara set about preparing coffee on the small stove. She was acutely aware of Declan's presence in the confined space of her room, his large frame somehow making the already small quarters feel even more intimate. "How was school today?" he asked without looking up from his work. The question surprised her with its normalcy, as if they had known each other for years rather than days. "Quite good, actually. The children are working on compositions about their futures, what they hope to become when they're grown." "And what do they hope to become?" Declan asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Zara smiled as she poured the coffee into two mismatched cups. "Oh, the usual dreams. Doctors, lawyers, stage actresses. Thomas Jenkins wants to be a lawman like you were." Declan's hand stilled momentarily. He'd do better to choose a different path. "Why do you say that?" Zara brought him a cup, careful not to disturb his work. He accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks, taking a sip before answering. "Being a lawman changes a person, makes you see the worst in people before the best, makes you hard." "You don't seem hard to me," Zara observed, perching on the edge of her bed, the only available seat now that Declan occupied the room's sole chair. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Then I'm better at hiding it than I thought." "Or perhaps you're not as hard as you believe," she countered gently. Their eyes met over the rim of his cup, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the recognition of kindred spirits. Both had left behind lives that no longer fit, seeking something new in the high mountain air of Breckenridge. Declan broke the moment first, setting down his coffee and returning to his task. "This new latch should serve you better," he explained, holding up a sturdier mechanism than the one he'd removed. "It's brass, not iron, so it won't contract as much in the cold, and I've smoothed out the strike plate so it catches properly." "You speak as if the door has a mind of its own," Zara remarked, amused. "All things have personalities if you pay attention," Declan replied, a seriousness in his tone that suggested he wasn't entirely joking. "Doors, horses, guns, they all have their ways." "And people?" Zara asked. "Do you read them as easily?" Declan considered the question, his hands continuing their skilled work. "Some. Others keep their thoughts better hidden." "And which am I?" The question slipped out before Zara could reconsider, and she immediately wished she could recall it. Declan's eyes met hers again, their blue depths thoughtful. "You're like this door," he said finally. "Straightforward enough at first glance, but with complexities that aren't immediately apparent." Zara wasn't sure whether to be flattered or insulted. "Are you calling me complicated, Mr. Yates?" "Declan," he corrected automatically. "And it wasn't meant as criticism. Simple things break easily. Complexity means there's depth, strength." His words settled around her like a warm blanket, unexpected but welcome. For so long, she had been told that her complexity was a flaw. Her father had constantly criticized her questioning nature, her refusal to simply accept what she was told. To hear someone suggest it might be a virtue instead was quietly revolutionary. "Thank you," she said softly. "I think that's one of the nicest things anyone has ever said to me." Declan looked momentarily startled, as if he hadn't expected his observation to carry such weight. "Just speaking the truth as I see it." They lapsed into comfortable silence as he continued working, fitting the new latch and testing it multiple times to ensure smooth operation. Zara took the opportunity to begin grading her students' essays, but she found her attention repeatedly drawn to Declan's hands, large and calloused, yet capable of such precision and care. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the floor, Declan finally declared the job complete. "There," he said with satisfaction, opening and closing the door several times in demonstration. "That should hold no matter how hard the wind blows." Zara rose to inspect his handiwork, running her fingers over the new latch with appreciation. It's perfect. I don't know how to thank you enough. No need for thanks, Declan said, packing away his tools. I was happy to help. A sudden boldness overtook Zara. Would you stay for supper again? I could prepare something a bit more substantial than last night's offering. Declan hesitated, and for a moment Zara feared he would refuse. Then he nodded, a smile breaking through his usual reserve. I'd like that, but only if you'll let me contribute. I passed the butcher's on my way here, and he had some fine-looking steaks. That sounds wonderful, Zara agreed, ignoring the voice of propriety that whispered it was improper to dine alone with a man in her private quarters 2 nights in succession. She had left such strictures behind in St. Louis, hadn't she? While Declan went to purchase the meat, Zara hurriedly tidied the room and set about preparing the rest of their meal. She had potatoes to roast, and some early spring greens Mrs. Holloway had shared from her small greenhouse. It wasn't fancy, but it would be a far cry from the plain fare she usually ate alone. By the time Declan returned, she had changed into a nicer dress, not formal, but prettier than her everyday wear, with small embroidered flowers at the collar and cuffs. She had also pinned her hair up again, though less severely than her teaching style, allowing a few curls to frame her face. If Declan noticed the change, he gave no sign beyond a momentary pause in the doorway, his eyes briefly tracing her silhouette before he presented the package of meat with a flourish. Freshest cuts in town, according to Mr. Hargrove. Together they prepared the meal, moving around each other in the small space with surprising ease. Declan, it turned out, was no stranger to cooking, having fended for himself during his years as a ranger. He seasoned the steaks with salt and a mixture of herbs he produced from his pocket, explaining that he carried them for just such occasions. Never know when you might need to make trail food taste like something worth eating, he said with a wry smile. As they worked, Zara found herself sharing stories of her childhood in St. Louis, the happier memories of her mother, who had encouraged her love of learning before succumbing to influenza when Zara was 15. In return, Declan spoke of his years in Texas, painting vivid pictures of the vast landscapes and the characters he had encountered. By the time they sat down to eat, the room was filled with the delicious aromas of roasted meat and potatoes, and a warmth that had nothing to do with the stove. Their conversation flowed easily, touching on books they had read, Zara many, Declan few but thoroughly, places they had seen and dreams they still harbored. I always wanted to see the ocean, Zara confessed over the last bites of her meal. To stand at the edge of something so vast and know that there are whole continents beyond the horizon. I've seen the Gulf, Declan replied. It's something to behold, especially at sunrise when the light hits the water just so. Makes a man feel small in the best possible way. Will you go back someday? She asked. A shadow crossed his face. No, too many ghosts in Texas for me now. Zara wanted to ask what he meant, what ghosts haunted this strong, capable man, but the set of his jaw warned against prying. Instead, she shifted the conversation to safer ground, asking about his plans once the pass opened and travel became possible again. Haven't decided yet, he admitted. Might head further west, California maybe, or north to Montana, somewhere with space to breathe. Do you never think of settling? Zara asked, careful to keep her tone casual. Declan was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on some middle distance. I used to, he said finally. Had it all planned out once. Land of my own, cattle, a house built with my own hands. He shook his head slightly, as if dislodging the memory. But plans change. Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. Indeed it does, Zara agreed softly, thinking of her own journey from dutiful daughter to independent teacher, hundreds of miles from the life she had been expected to live. The evening grew late, and eventually Declan rose to take his leave. At the door now functioning perfectly, he paused, hat in hand. "About Saturday," he began, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "I should warn you that accompanying me might not be the wisest choice for a schoolteacher's reputation. I'm not well regarded in all circles." Zara raised an eyebrow. "Because of your past as a ranger, that and other things." He shifted uncomfortably. "I've had to use my gun more than once since arriving in Breckenridge. Nothing unlawful," he hastened to add, "but enough to give some folks the wrong impression." "Are you trying to dissuade me from accepting your invitation?" Zara asked directly. "No," he replied with equal directness. "I'm trying to ensure you know what you're agreeing to." Zara considered his warning, weighing it against the man she was coming to know. "I appreciate your concern," she said finally, "but I prefer to make my own judgments about character rather than rely on town gossip. My acceptance stands." Relief washed over his features, followed by a smile that transformed his entire countenance. "Then I'll see you on Saturday, 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock, she confirmed, returning his smile. After he had gone, Zara found herself standing at the window, watching his tall figure disappear down the snowy street. A curious mixture of excitement and apprehension filled her chest. In just a few days, Declan Yates had disrupted the careful routine she had established in Breckenridge, introducing an element of unpredictability that was both thrilling and unsettling. As she prepared for bed, Zara resolved to maintain her independence while exploring this unexpected connection. She had come west to build a life on her own terms, and that hadn't changed. But perhaps, she thought as she drifted towards sleep, there was room in that life for something or someone she hadn't anticipated. The next few days passed in a blur of teaching duties and preparations for the social. Zara found herself unusually preoccupied, her mind wandering to thoughts of Declan at unexpected moments while explaining fractions to her students, during her solitary evening meals, as she lay awake listening to the winter wind whip around the eaves of the boarding house. She didn't see him again before Saturday, though she heard his name mentioned more than once in conversations around town. The general store owner's wife, Mrs. Finch, made a point of commenting on that dangerous-looking ranger, while Zara was selecting fabric for a new collar. The woman's tone made it clear she disapproved of his presence in Breckenridge, and her sharp glance at Zara suggested rumors of their connection had indeed begun to circulate. Zara had merely smiled politely and changed the subject, but the encounter left her uneasy. As a schoolteacher, she was held to higher standards than most women in town. The school board, composed primarily of the wealthier mine owners and businessmen, expected her to be above reproach in all matters. An association with a man of questionable reputation could potentially jeopardize her position. Yet when Saturday evening arrived, and Zara stood before her small mirror adjusting the pins in her hair, she found she couldn't bring herself to regret accepting Declan's invitation. She had chosen a dress of deep green wool, her finest, saved for special occasions, with a lace collar she had sewn herself. The color brought out the gold flecks in her gray eyes and complemented her dark brown hair, which she had arranged in a more becoming style than her usual practical bun. At precisely 7 o'clock, a knock sounded at her door. Zara's heart leapt traitorously in her chest as she crossed the room, smoothing her skirts one last time before opening the door. Declan stood in the hallway, transformed from the rough-hewn man she had come to know. He had shaved, his jaw smooth and revealing a small scar she hadn't noticed before. His usually unruly hair was neatly combed, and he wore a dark suit that, while not new, fit him well enough to suggest it had been tailored specifically for him. In his hands, He held a small bouquet of winter hothouse flowers, delicate white blooms that must have cost a small fortune in the mountains during January. "Miss Kessler," he greeted her, his voice carrying a hint of nerve she found endearing. "You look beautiful." Zara felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, you look quite handsome yourself." He extended the flowers. "These are for you. They're not much, but they're lovely," she interrupted, accepting the bouquet with genuine pleasure. "Let me put them in water before we go." As she arranged the flowers in a simple jar, the closest thing to a vase she owned, Zara was conscious of Declan's gaze following her movements. There was something in his expression she couldn't quite name, a mixture of admiration and something deeper, more complex. "Shall we?" she asked, retrieving her heavy shawl from its hook. Declan stepped forward, taking the shawl from her hands. "Allow me." He draped it carefully around her shoulders, his hands lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. The gesture was intimate in its simplicity, and Zara found herself momentarily breathless. "Thank you," she murmured, gathering her composure. The church hall was only a short walk from the boarding house, but the night was bitterly cold, the stars sharp and brilliant in the clear black sky. Declan offered his arm, and Zara took it gratefully, both for warmth and stability on the icy paths. They walked in comfortable silence, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. As they approached the hall, the sound of music and laughter spilled out into the night. Lanterns hung from the eaves, casting pools of golden light onto the snow, and through the windows, Zara could see couples already dancing to the lively tune of fiddles and a piano. "Having second thoughts?" Declan asked, noticing her hesitation. Zara squared her shoulders. "Not in the least." They entered together, Declan's hand warm at the small of her back, and immediately became the focus of curious glances and whispered comments. Zara recognized the faces of her students' parents, the shopkeepers who supplied her modest needs, and several members of the school board, including its chairman, Mr. Whittaker, who frowned slightly upon noticing her companion. "Perhaps this wasn't the best idea," Declan murmured close to her ear. "Nonsense," Zara replied with more confidence than she felt. "We have as much right to enjoy the social as anyone else." Before Declan could respond, they were approached by the minister's wife, Mrs. Thompson, a kindly woman who had been one of the few to welcome Zara warmly upon her arrival in Breckenridge. "Miss Kessler, how lovely to see you," she greeted, then turned to Declan with equal warmth. "And Mr. Yates, I'm so glad you could both join us this evening." Her genuine welcome eased some of the tension that had been building in Zara's chest. "Thank you for organizing such a wonderful event, Mrs. Thompson. The hall looks beautiful." Indeed, the usually plain church hall had been transformed with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and dozens of candles that cast a warm glow over the proceedings. Tables lined one wall, laden with food contributed by the townspeople, while the center of the room had been cleared for dancing. "Would you care for some punch?" Declan asked after Mrs. Thompson had moved on to greet other arrivals. "That would be lovely," Zara agreed, grateful for the momentary reprieve from the stairs. As Declan made his way to the refreshment table, Zara found herself approached by several of the mothers of her students, all curious about her gentleman friend. She deflected their questions with practiced ease, explaining simply that Mr. Yates had been kind enough to assist her during the blizzard, and she had accepted his invitation to the social out of gratitude. The explanation seemed to satisfy most, though Zara caught a few knowing smiles that suggested not everyone was convinced their relationship was so straightforward. By the time Declan returned with 2 cups of punch, the initial wave of curiosity had subsided somewhat, and the focus of the gathering had returned to the dancing. "Everything all right?" he asked, handing her a cup. Perfect, she assured him, taking a sip of the sweet, fruity drink. Though I suspect we'll be the subject of tomorrow's gossip regardless of what we do tonight. A flicker of concern crossed his features. I don't want to cause trouble for you. You're not, she said firmly. Besides, I've never been one to base my decisions on what others might think. The hint of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. I'm beginning to understand that about you. The fiddle struck up a new tune, a waltz this time, slower and more intimate than the previous dances. Declan set down his empty cup and held out his hand. You do me the honor. Zara hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. I should warn you, I'm not particularly accomplished. That makes two of us, he replied with a chuckle. We'll muddle through together. And somehow they did. Despite his size and his profession, Declan moved with surprising grace, guiding Zara around the floor with a gentle but confident hand at her waist. She followed his lead easily, their bodies finding a natural rhythm together, as if they had danced many times before. You lied, she accused playfully as they completed a turn. You're quite good at this. My mother insisted I learn, he admitted. Said no son of hers would embarrass her at social functions by stomping on ladies' feet. A wise woman, Zara observed, enjoying the way his hand tightened slightly at her waist as they navigated around another couple. She was, he agreed, a shadow of old grief crossing his face. She would have liked you. The simple statement carried more weight than its words alone suggested. Zara felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the exertion of dancing. As the evening progressed, Zara found herself relaxing more fully into Declan's company. They danced several more times, sampled the abundant refreshments, and conversed with those townspeople willing to overlook Declan's reputation, a number that seemed to grow as the night went on, and his respectful, courteous behavior contradicted the rumors that had preceded him. During a break in the dancing, as they stood near one of the windows enjoying the cool air, Zara noticed Mr. Whittaker approaching with purpose in his stride. The school board chairman was a stern man in his 50s, with iron gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to having his opinions respected. Miss Kessler, he greeted her, his tone formal. Might I have a word? Zara exchanged a glance with Declan, who nodded slightly, indicating he understood the need for privacy. Of course, Mr. Whittaker. Would you excuse us, Mr. Yates? Certainly, Declan replied, matching the formal tone. I'll get us some more refreshments. As he moved away, Mr. Whittaker wasted no time in coming to the point. I notice you've chosen rather controversial company this evening, Miss Kessler. Zara straightened her spine, meeting his gaze directly. Mr. Yates has been nothing but a gentleman, sir. Perhaps, Whittaker conceded. But his reputation precedes him. There are stories, with all due respect, Zara interrupted, keeping her voice low but firm. I don't put much stock in stories. I prefer to judge people based on their actions, not rumors. The older man's eyebrows rose at her interruption. Be that as it may, as our schoolteacher, you must be aware that your conduct reflects on the entire community. The children look to you as an example. And what example would I be setting if I judged a man without knowing him? Zara countered. Is that not the opposite of what we teach our children, to be fair and open-minded? Whittaker seemed taken aback by her response, and for a moment, Zara feared she had overstepped. Then, unexpectedly, a hint of respect appeared in his eyes. You make a fair point, Miss Kessler, he acknowledged. However, I would caution you to proceed with care. Not everyone in town will be as willing to give Mr. Yates the benefit of the doubt. I understand, Zara said, softening her tone, and I appreciate your concern, but I assure you my judgment remains sound. Whittaker nodded, apparently satisfied for the moment. "Enjoy the remainder of your evening, then." As he walked away, Zara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The confrontation had gone better than she might have expected, but the warning was clear: her association with Declan was being noticed, and not all reactions would be as measured as Whittaker's. Declan returned moments later, 2 plates of dessert in hand. "Everything all right?" he asked, handing her one. "Just a gentle reminder of my position in the community," Zara replied, taking a bite of the apple cake to give herself a moment to regain her composure. Declan's expression darkened. "He was warning you about me." It wasn't a question, but Zara nodded anyway. "It doesn't matter. I make my own decisions." "It matters if your livelihood is at stake," Declan said quietly. "These people depend on you to teach their children. They won't hesitate to replace you if they think you're setting a poor example." The truth of his words stung, but Zara refused to be cowed. "Then I'll simply have to prove them wrong about both of us." Declan studied her face for a long moment, something like wonder in his gaze. "You're a remarkable woman, Zara Kessler." The use of her first name, rare enough to still carry significance, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the winter chill. "And you, Declan Yates, are not at all the man they think you are." They finished their desserts in comfortable silence, the music and laughter of the social continuing around them. When the fiddles struck up again, Declan offered his hand once more, and Zara took it without hesitation. This dance was slower, more intimate than the others, and Declan held her closer than propriety strictly allowed. Zara found she didn't mind. In the circle of his arms, with his steady heartbeat beneath her palm and his breath warm against her hair, she felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since before her mother's death. "Thank you for coming with me tonight," Declan murmured as they swayed to the music. "Thank you for asking me," she replied simply. The rest of the evening passed in a pleasant blur of dancing, conversation, and shared laughter. By the time they left the church hall, the moon was high in the sky, casting silver light on the snow-covered streets. The temperature had dropped further, and Zara shivered despite her heavy shawl. Without a word, Declan removed his coat and placed it around her shoulders, just as he had on that first night when he'd found her half-frozen at the saloon door. The warmth of it enveloped her immediately, along with his scent: leather, pine, and something uniquely his own. "You'll freeze," she protested, though she made no move to return the garment. "I'm used to the cold," he replied, offering his arm once more. "And it's not far to the boarding house." They walked in companionable silence, the only sound the crunch of snow beneath their boots. The town was quiet, most residents either still at the social or already tucked into their beds. It felt as though they were the only 2 people in the world, isolated in their own private moment against the vast backdrop of the Colorado night. All too soon, they reached the boarding house. At the door, Zara turned to face Declan, reluctant for the evening to end. "I had a wonderful time," she said, slipping his coat from her shoulders and returning it to him. "As did I," he replied, his voice low and warm in the darkness. Despite the whispers and the warnings, Zara smiled, perhaps especially because of them. "There's something rather exhilarating about defying expectations, don't you think?" Declan chuckled, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Kessler." "I hope that's a good thing, Mr. Yates." "The best thing," he assured her, his expression turning serious. "Zara, he stopped, seeming to struggle with what he wanted to say. In the moonlight, his features were cast in silver and shadow, his eyes dark but intent on her face. "Yes," she prompted gently. Instead of speaking, Declan took a step closer, closing the already small distance between them. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, he raised one hand to her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly soft against her skin. "May I?" he whispered, his breath visible in the cold air between them. Zara's heart thundered in her chest, drowning out the voice of propriety that whispered she should refuse. Instead, she nodded, a small but unmistakable movement. Declan's lips met hers with unexpected gentleness, a whisper of contact that sent warmth flooding through her veins despite the freezing night air. His hand cradled her face as if she were something infinitely precious, and Zara found herself leaning into his touch, her own hands coming to rest against his chest. The kiss deepened, becoming something more than the chaste exchange she had anticipated. There was hunger in it, not just physical desire, but a yearning for connection, for understanding, for the simple comfort of not being alone. Zara responded in kind, allowing herself to express the emotions that had been building since the moment he had first wrapped his coat around her shoulders. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Declan rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "I've wanted to do that since I first saw you by the fire at the saloon," he confessed. "I'm glad you waited until now," Zara replied softly. "It was worth the anticipation," he smiled, his eyes opening to meet hers once more. "Good night, Zara." "Good night, Declan," she whispered, reluctantly stepping back toward the door. As she watched him walk away, his broad shoulders soon swallowed by the darkness, Zara touched her fingers to her lips, still warm from his kiss. She had come to Breckenridge seeking independence, but perhaps what she had found instead was something equally valuable: the possibility of a connection based not on obligation or expectation, but on genuine understanding and mutual respect. With that thought warming her more effectively than any coat could have done, Zara entered the boarding house, closed the door softly behind her, and made her way to her room, where dreams of a future she hadn't dared imagine awaited her. The week following the social brought a fresh dusting of snow to Breckenridge, and a noticeable shift in the town's attitude toward both Zara and Declan. Where before there had been whispers behind hands and pointed glances, now there were open smiles, friendly greetings, and, most surprisingly, invitations. Mrs. Peterson asked them both to Sunday dinner after church services. The Thompsons invited Declan to join the men's Bible study group. Even Mr. Whittaker acknowledged them with a curt but respectful nod when they passed on the street. "You've worked some kind of magic on this town," Declan remarked as they strolled together after school on Wednesday, a habit they had fallen into without discussion. "They're looking at me differently. They're seeing you as I do," Zara replied simply. "As a man of honor and kindness, not the dangerous gunslinger they imagined." Declan's expression turned thoughtful. "And how exactly do you see me, Zara Kessler?" The question caught her off guard, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks despite the cold air. "I see a man who broke down a door to help a stranger," she began slowly. "A man who uses his hands to build and repair, not just to draw a weapon. A man who dances surprisingly well and kisses even better." The last comment was bold, especially for a schoolteacher speaking in the open street, but the look in Declan's eyes made the risk worthwhile. He stopped walking, turning to face her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And I see a woman who refuses to be defined by others' expectations," he said, his voice low and earnest. "Who faces adversity with courage and grace, who makes me question everything I thought I knew about my future." The words hung between them, laden with meaning. Zara's heart beat a rapid tattoo against her ribs as she absorbed what he was telling her: that she had changed his plans, that he was reconsidering his intention to move on once the pass opened. Before she could respond, the moment was interrupted by the arrival of one of her students, young Emma Blackburn, running toward them with excitement. "Miss Kessler, Mr. Yates," she called, her cheeks red from exertion. "Ma says to tell you that the mail's come through. The pass is clear enough for the stage." The news sent a ripple of both joy and uncertainty through Zara. The winter isolation of Breckenridge was finally broken, meaning supplies, mail, and travelers could once again move freely between the mountain town and the larger settlements beyond. It also meant that Declan no longer had the excuse of impassable roads to keep him in town. "That's wonderful news, Emma," Zara said, forcing brightness into her voice. "Thank you for letting us know." The child beamed, pleased to be the bearer of important tidings, then continued on her way to spread the word to others. Declan and Zara resumed walking, but a new tension had settled between them. Neither spoke until they reached the boarding house, where they usually parted ways. "Will you be leaving now?" Zara asked, unable to keep the question contained any longer. Declan studied her face, his expression unreadable. "I don't know," he admitted. "I hadn't expected." "Hadn't expected what?" she prompted when he fell silent. "You," he said simply. "I hadn't expected to find someone who makes me want to stay in one place." Zara's pulse quickened at his words. "And does that frighten you?" "Terrify," he confirmed with a small, self-deprecating smile. "I've been moving for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to be still." "Perhaps you just need a reason worth staying for," Zara suggested softly. Declan's gaze intensified. "Perhaps I've found one." He took her hand, his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles. "Have dinner with me tonight at the hotel restaurant, a proper dinner, not just soup in your room." "I'd like that," Zara agreed, warmth spreading through her at his touch. "What time shall I be ready?" "6 o'clock. I'll come for you." "I'll be waiting," she promised. As she watched him walk away, Zara found herself hoping fervently that the road ahead would bring Declan Yates not to California or Montana, but right back to her doorstep. The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Breckenridge, which wasn't saying much by St. Louis standards, but represented the height of luxury in the mountain mining town. White tablecloths covered the tables, and a small vase with a single dried flower adorned each one. The lighting was softer than the harsh lamps of the saloon, and a young man played quiet piano music in the corner. Zara had dressed with particular care for the evening, wearing a gown of deep blue silk that she had brought from St. Louis, but had yet to find occasion to wear in Breckenridge. It was perhaps a bit formal for the setting, but the look in Declan's eyes when he saw her made any potential impropriety worthwhile. "You look stunning," he said, rising from his chair as the maitre d' escorted her to their table. "Thank you," she replied, pleased by his appreciation. "You look quite handsome yourself." Indeed he did, in a suit that fit him better than the one he had worn to the social, suggesting he might have visited the tailor in the intervening days. His hair was neatly combed, his face clean-shaven, and if not for the weathered quality of his skin and the vigilant awareness in his eyes, he might have been mistaken for any prosperous businessman enjoying dinner. They ordered from the limited but ambitious menu beef for Declan, trout for Zara, and a bottle of wine to share. As they waited for their meals, conversation flowed easily between them, touching on topics both light and meaningful. "Have you received any letters now that the mail has come through?" Declan asked, pouring wine into Zara's glass. "Just one," she replied. "From my sister in Philadelphia. She writes every month, though I haven't received anything since November due to the weather." "Nothing from St. Louis?" he inquired carefully. Zara shook her head. "My father made it quite clear that when I left I was no longer welcome to consider his house my home, and my other sister, well, she takes her cues from him." "I'm sorry," Declan said, genuine regret in his voice. "Don't be," Zara assured him. "I made my choice and I don't regret it." Not even on the coldest nights. She smiled, lightening the moment. Well, perhaps I regretted it slightly when I was locked out in the blizzard. Declan chuckled. I'd say that was a reasonable moment for second thoughts. Their meals arrived, expertly prepared despite the limitations of the hotel's kitchen and the challenges of obtaining fresh ingredients in winter. As they ate, Zara found herself studying Declan's hands, the way they handled the knife and fork with unexpected grace, the strength evident in his fingers, the small scars that told stories of a life lived fully and often dangerously. "What are you thinking?" Declan asked, catching her gaze. "I'm thinking that I know so little about you," Zara admitted. "About your life before Breckenridge, about the ghosts you mentioned that keep you from returning to Texas." Declan set down his fork, his expression growing serious. "It's not a pleasant story." "Few true stories are entirely pleasant," she replied gently, "but I'd like to know if you're willing to share." He was silent for a long moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "I was a ranger for 10 years, as I told you. Toward the end of that time, I was tasked with bringing in an outlaw named James Harker. He'd robbed a series of banks along the border, killed at least 3 men that we knew of." Declan took a sip of his wine before continuing. "I tracked him for weeks, finally cornering him near a small town called Presidio. But when I went to make the arrest, he wasn't alone. He had a woman with him, his wife, though I didn't know that at the time." A shadow crossed his face, and Zara knew they were approaching the heart of his pain. "What happened?" she prompted softly when he didn't continue. "She drew on me," Declan said, his voice flat. "Had a small pistol hidden in her skirts. I reacted the way I'd been trained to react, drew and fired. Only afterward did I learn she was expecting a child." Zara's hand flew to her mouth, her heart aching for both the woman who had lost her life and the man who had to live with having taken it. "Declan, you couldn't have known." "That's what the judge said at the inquiry," he replied without emotion. "That's what my captain said. Self-defense, they called it, but I see her face in my dreams, her and the child that never had a chance to be born." "Is that why you left the Rangers?" He nodded. "Turned in my badge the next day. Couldn't stomach the idea of taking another life, justified or not." A bitter smile twisted his lips. "Ironic, given that I've still had to draw my gun more times than I care to count since then. Some skills you can't unlearn, no matter how much you might want to." Zara reached across the table, covering his hand with her own. "Thank you for telling me." Declan looked surprised by the gesture but didn't pull away. "Most people would be running for the door by now." "I'm not most people," she reminded him. "No," he agreed, turning his hand to clasp hers. "You're certainly not." The moment stretched between them, charged with understanding and something deeper that neither was quite ready to name. Finally, Declan released her hand and picked up his fork once more. "Your turn," he said, his tone deliberately lighter. "What ghosts haunt Zara Kessler?" Zara considered deflecting the question, but that seemed unfair after the trust he had shown her. "My ghosts are less dramatic," she began, "but no less persistent." She told him about her mother's death when she was 15, leaving her at the mercy of a father who viewed his daughters as assets to be leveraged for social and financial gain. She described her eldest sister's loveless marriage to a man 30 years her senior, arranged by their father to secure a business partnership. And she spoke of her own narrow escape from a similar fate, fleeing in the night with only what she could carry, using the money her mother had secretly set aside for her education to purchase a train ticket west instead. "I answered the advertisement for a teacher here, because it was as far from St. Louis as my funds would allow," she concluded, "and because I liked the idea of mountains between myself and my father." "He wouldn't come after you?" Declan asked, concern evident in his voice. "I doubt it," Zara replied. His pride was wounded more than his heart. "By now, he's likely told everyone that I've joined a convent or died of mountain fever, anything to explain my absence without admitting I defied him. And you've never regretted your decision, even when you're teaching arithmetic to children who'd rather be anywhere else." A smile touched Zara's lips, especially then, because even on the most challenging days I'm making my own choices, living my own life. Declan studied her face with something like wonder. "You're the bravest person I've ever met, Zara Kessler." The compliment warmed her more than the wine had done. "I could say the same of you, Declan Yates." The rest of their dinner passed pleasantly, the conversation turning to lighter topics, books they had enjoyed, places they hoped to see someday, childhood memories that brought smiles rather than pain. By the time they finished their dessert, a remarkably good apple pie, Zara felt as though she had known Declan for years rather than weeks. As they left the restaurant, the night air was crisp, but not as bitterly cold as it had been in recent weeks. A sign, perhaps, that winter's grip on Breckenridge was finally beginning to loosen. Stars speckled the clear black sky, and the nearly full moon cast enough light to illuminate their path without the need for a lantern. "May I walk you home?" Declan asked, offering his arm. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't," Zara replied, slipping her hand into the crook of his elbow. They walked slowly, as if by mutual agreement prolonging their time together. The town was quiet, most residents already retired for the evening. Their footsteps echoed softly on the packed snow, and their breath formed clouds in the cold air. "I've been thinking," Declan said after several minutes of comfortable silence, "about what comes next." Zara's heart skipped a beat. "And what have you decided?" "That I'm tired of running," he replied simply. "Tired of always looking for the next place, never allowing myself to put down roots." Hope blossomed in Zara's chest, but she tempered it with caution. "Does that mean you're considering staying in Breckenridge?" They had reached the boarding house, and Declan turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I'm considering staying wherever you are," he said, his voice low and serious. "If that's something you might want." Zara's breath caught in her throat. "Are you? What exactly are you saying, Declan?" "I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you, Zara Kessler," he declared, the words simple but profound in the quiet night. "I didn't expect it, didn't plan for it, but there it is. And if you'll have me, I'd like to see where this might lead." For a moment, Zara could only stare at him, overwhelmed by the declaration and the emotions it stirred within her. Then, almost of their own accord, her hands moved to frame his face, drawing him down until their lips met in a kiss that expressed what words could not. When they finally parted, both breathless, Zara rested her forehead against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "I love you too," she whispered, the words both terrifying and exhilarating as they left her lips. "And yes, I want to see where this leads." Declan's arms tightened around her, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I don't have much to offer," he warned. "No land, no fortune, just my hands and my heart." "That's all I've ever wanted," Zara assured him, looking up to meet his gaze. "Someone who sees me for who I am, not for what I can bring to a marriage or how I might advance their position." The word marriage hung between them, neither confirming nor denying that this was the direction they were heading. It was too soon for such discussions, too soon for promises that binding. But the possibility was there, unspoken but acknowledged. "It won't be easy," Declan cautioned. "There are those in town who will never fully trust me, no matter how long I stay or how honestly I live. And there are those who will always believe a woman's place is in the home, not the schoolhouse," Zara countered. "We'll face those challenges together if you're willing." More than willing, he assured her, brushing a curl from her face with gentle fingers. Eager, even. They shared one more kiss, sweet and full of promise, before reluctantly parting for the night. As Zara watched Declan walk away, his tall figure gradually fading into the darkness, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. For the first time since leaving St. Louis, the future didn't feel like an uncertain path she would have to walk alone. Instead, it stretched before her like the night sky, vast and mysterious, but studded with points of light that promised guidance and beauty in equal measure. And at her side, a partner she had never expected to find, especially not in the aftermath of a blizzard that had nearly claimed her life. Sometimes, Zara reflected as she entered the warmth of the boarding house, the most precious gifts came in the most unexpected packages, like sanctuary, offered by a stranger, warmth provided by a borrowed coat, and love born in the heart of a Colorado winter. Spring came to Breckenridge with surprising swiftness, the snow retreating up the mountainsides and revealing patches of vibrant green beneath. The creek that ran through town swelled with melted snow, its rushing waters providing a constant backdrop to the renewed activity of a community emerging from winter's isolation. For Zara, the changing season brought not only warmer days and the ability to teach her students outdoors on pleasant afternoons, but also a deepening of her relationship with Declan. In the 3 months since they had declared their feelings, they had become a recognized couple in town, their presence together at church services and community events no longer raising eyebrows or prompting whispers. Declan had found work as a carpenter, his skills much in demand as the townspeople began repairs and improvements postponed during the winter months. He had also, with quiet determination, begun purchasing materials and preparing plans for something he kept carefully concealed from Zara, despite her curious questions. Patience was all he would say, a mischievous glint in his eye whenever she pressed for details. Some things are worth waiting for. On a particularly fine Saturday in late April, Declan arrived at the boarding house shortly after breakfast, dressed in clean but practical clothes and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. "I have something to show you," he announced when Zara opened the door. "Are you free for the day?" "I have some essays to grade, but they can wait," she replied, intrigued by his evident enthusiasm. "What is this mysterious surprise? You'll see," he said enigmatically. "Wear something you don't mind getting a bit dusty." Curious now, Zara changed into a simple dress she often wore for classroom cleaning days, tied a bonnet over her hair, and joined Declan outside. To her surprise, he had borrowed a wagon from Mr. Peterson, complete with a horse that looked almost as impatient as Declan himself. "We're going for a drive," she asked as he helped her onto the seat. "Not far," he assured her, climbing up beside her and taking the reins. They headed south out of town, following the road that wound alongside the creek. The day was perfect warm sunshine, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and new growth, and the mountains rising majestically around them, their peaks still snow-covered against the brilliant blue sky. After about 20 minutes, Declan turned the wagon onto a smaller track that Zara hadn't noticed before. It led up a slight rise, through a stand of pines, and emerged in a small clearing that overlooked both the creek and, in the distance, the town of Breckenridge. In the center of the clearing stood the beginnings of a structure, a foundation of cut stone and the wooden framework of what appeared to be a modest house. Tools were neatly arranged on a makeshift workbench, and a pile of lumber waited nearby, covered with canvas to protect it from the elements. "Declan," Zara breathed, understanding dawning as he helped her down from the wagon. "What is this "This," he said, pride evident in his voice, "is our future, if you want it." He took her hand, leading her closer to the partially constructed building. 2 acres, he explained. Purchased from the Peterson family. Good water from the creek, shelter from the north winds thanks to those pines, and close enough to town for you to continue teaching. Zara walked around the foundation, trying to absorb what she was seeing. "You're building a house." "I'm building our house," he corrected gently. "Or hoping to, anyway." He guided her to where the front door would eventually stand, then turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I told you once that I had planned to have land of my own, a house built with my own hands," he reminded her. "That dream didn't die, it just got set aside for a while. And now, thanks to you, I've found the courage to pursue it again." Declan dropped to one knee, still holding her hands, and Zara's heart began to race. "Zara Kessler," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "You've brought light back into my life when I thought I would always walk in shadow. You've shown me that the past doesn't have to define the future, and that even the most damaged heart can heal if given the chance." From his pocket, he produced a small velvet box, a luxury that must have cost him dearly. Opening it, he revealed a simple but beautiful ring, a small diamond flanked by 2 sapphires that matched the color of his eyes. "Will you marry me? Be my partner, my conscience, my heart's home for all the days we're given." Tears filled Zara's eyes, blurring her vision but not diminishing the love shining in Declan's face. In that moment, she saw not just the man kneeling before her, but the life they could build together, mornings waking up side by side, evenings sharing the day's events, perhaps someday children running through the house he was building with such care and hope. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you, Declan Yates." Joy transformed his features as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to pull her into an embrace that lifted her feet from the ground. Their lips met in a kiss that tasted of tears and laughter, and the promise of a future neither had dared to imagine when the Colorado winter had brought them together. When they finally separated, Declan kept his arms around her, unwilling to let her go completely. "I thought perhaps a June wedding," he suggested. "By then, the house should have walls and a roof, if not all the finishing touches." "June sounds perfect," Zara agreed, then hesitated. "But what about your plans to keep moving west? Are you truly content to settle here?" "I'm content to be wherever you are," Declan replied without hesitation. "But yes, Breckenridge feels right. It's a town with its own ghosts, its own rough edges, but also a place where people can start over. Like us." Zara looked out over the view from what would become their front porch, the creek sparkling in the sunlight, the distant rooftops of the town, the mountains that had once seemed like barriers but now felt like guardians of their new beginning. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Like you," Declan replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. They spent the rest of the day at the building site, Declan showing Zara the plans he had drawn, explaining where each room would be, pointing out special features he had incorporated with her in mind: bookshelves built into the walls, large windows to capture the light she loved, a small study where she could grade papers and prepare lessons. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, casting long shadows across the clearing, Declan packed up his tools and helped Zara back into the wagon. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked as they started down the track toward the main road. "To work on the house." "Every free moment until it's finished," he promised. "Though I might need to recruit some help if we're to have it ready by June." "I'm sure the children would be delighted to assist," Zara suggested. "Many of them have experience with building projects, and it would be good practice for their measuring and arithmetic skills." Declan chuckled, shaking his head in admiration. "Always the teacher." "Always," she agreed with a smile, though soon to be a wife as well. Mrs. Zara Yates, he said, as if testing how it sounded. I like the ring of that. So do I, she admitted, leaning against his shoulder as the wagon made its way back toward town. So do I. News of their engagement spread through Breckenridge with the speed of a spring flood, eliciting reactions that ranged from genuine delight to barely concealed disapproval. Mrs. Thompson immediately offered the church for the ceremony, while Mrs. Holloway declared her intention to bake the wedding cake. Even Mr. Whittaker, after an initial expression of concern about how Zara's marriage might affect her teaching duties, eventually offered his congratulations. "You've tamed our schoolmarm, Yates," he said when encountering Declan at the general store. "See that you deserve her." "I intend to spend my life trying, sir," Declan replied with more deference than he usually showed the older man. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Zara continued her teaching duties while also helping with the house whenever possible. On weekends, she would join Declan at the building site, sometimes bringing students who had volunteered to assist in exchange for practical lessons in measurement and construction. True to his word, Declan worked tirelessly, from dawn until dusk most days, with occasional help from men in town who had come to respect his skills and work ethic. The frame was completed, the roof raised, and the walls enclosed with surprising speed, transforming the skeleton of a structure into something recognizably a home. In early June, just 2 weeks before the wedding, Zara stood in what would become their bedroom, watching as Declan installed the window that would give them a view of the sunrise each morning. "It's really happening, isn't it?" she mused, running her fingers along the freshly planed wood of the window frame. "Sometimes I still feel as though I might wake up and find this was all a dream." Declan set down his hammer and crossed to where she stood, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "If it's a dream, then we're sharing it," he said, his voice warm against her ear. "And I never want to wake up." Zara leaned back against his chest, savoring the solid strength of him. "Nor I." They stood like that for a long moment, watching as the late afternoon sun cast golden light through the new window, painting patterns on the unfinished floor. In that light, Zara could almost see the future unfolding: the bed they would share, the mornings they would greet together, the life that would unfold within these walls they were building both literally and figuratively. "I love you," she said simply, turning in his arms to face him. "And I love you," he replied, bending to kiss her with a tenderness that still surprised her, given the rough exterior he presented to the world. A week later, disaster struck in the form of a letter delivered to the boarding house. Zara recognized the handwriting immediately, her father's precise, authoritative script that had always reminded her of his unyielding personality. With trembling hands, she opened it, her worst fears confirmed by the contents. Somehow, her father had learned of her whereabouts and her impending marriage. The letter was brief but explicit. He was on his way to Breckenridge to put an end to this foolishness and bring her back to St. Louis, where the suitor he had chosen, apparently still interested despite her flight, awaited. Zara sat heavily on her bed, the letter crumpled in her fist, as panic threatened to overwhelm her. She had truly believed she was free of her father's control, that the distance and time had severed his hold over her life. To discover otherwise, and on the eve of what should have been her happiest day, was almost more than she could bear. Her first instinct was to run to gather what she could carry and flee again, perhaps further west where her father would never think to look. But even as the thought formed, she rejected it. She had found love in Breckenridge, built a life and a future here. She would not abandon it out of fear. Instead, she smoothed the letter, tucked it into her pocket, and set out to find Declan. He deserved to know what they were facing, and together they would find a way to confront this threat to their happiness. She found him at the house, as she had known she would, installing the front door, a beautifully crafted piece with small panes of glass at the top to allow light into the entryway. He looked up as she approached, a smile warming his features until he registered her expression. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, setting down his tools and moving to meet her. Wordlessly, Zara handed him the letter. He read it quickly, his jaw tightening with each line, a muscle working in his cheek as he controlled his anger. "When did this arrive?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Just now," Zara replied. "The postmark is from Denver 3 days ago. He could be here any time." Declan nodded, folding the letter and handing it back to her. "Then we need to be prepared." "What can we do?" Zara asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "He's a powerful man, Declan. He has connections, influence." "So do I," Declan replied, a hint of his ranger past evident in his bearing. "And more importantly, the law is on our side. You're of age, Zara. He has no legal right to force you to return to St. Louis or to marry anyone against your will. The law hasn't always been enough to stop my father from getting what he wants," Zara said quietly. Declan's expression softened, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "This time it will be," he promised. "Because this time you're not facing him alone." They spent the evening making preparations not for flight, but for confrontation. Declan spoke with the sheriff, explaining the situation and ensuring that the law would be on their side if needed. Zara wrote a clear statement of her intentions, had it witnessed by the minister and notarized by the town clerk, leaving no legal ambiguity about her desire to remain in Breckenridge and marry Declan. And then they waited. The stagecoach arrived from Denver 2 days later, carrying among its passengers a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, his clothing marking him as someone of means, and his bearing suggesting he was accustomed to being obeyed. Gilbert Kessler had arrived in Breckenridge. Word reached Zara within the hour, delivered by one of her students who had observed the newcomer asking directions to the school. She was in the middle of a lesson when a knock at the classroom door signaled his arrival. "Continue with your reading," she instructed her students, her voice remarkably steady despite the racing of her heart. "I'll just be a moment." Opening the door, she found herself face to face with her father for the first time in nearly a year. He had aged, she noted with a distant sort of surprise. The hair at his temples was fully gray now, and lines had deepened around his mouth and eyes. "Father," she acknowledged coolly, stepping into the hallway and closing the classroom door behind her. "Zara," he replied, his gaze assessing her with a critical eye. "You look well." "I am well," she confirmed. "Happier than I've ever been, in fact." His expression hardened. "So I've been informed. This dalliance with a former lawman has apparently turned your head completely." "It's not a dalliance, Father," Zara said firmly. "Declan and I are to be married in 5 days. I love him and he loves me." "Love," Gilbert scoffed, the word like a curse on his lips. "What has love to do with a sensible match?" "Mr. Harrington offers security, social position, connections that could benefit our entire family." "Mr. Harrington is old enough to be my grandfather," Zara countered, "and cold enough to freeze whatever warmth remained in my heart. I would rather die than marry him." Her father's face flushed with anger. "You always were the most difficult of my daughters, the most willful. Your mother indulged you too much, filled your head with romantic notions instead of practical considerations." "My mother taught me to value myself," Zara corrected him. "To believe I deserved happiness, not just security." Gilbert's expression twisted with contempt. "And you think you'll find happiness with this gunslinger, this drifter with no name, no fortune, no future?" How long before he tires of playing house and moves on to his next adventure, leaving you with nothing but regrets? The doubt her father sought to plant found no purchase in Zara's heart. "Declan Yates is the finest man I've ever known," she said with quiet conviction. "He has built us a home with his own hands. He respects me as an equal, values my mind as well as my heart, and he would never abandon me or anyone else he cared for." "Pretty words," Gilbert sneered. "But words won't feed you or clothe you or provide for the children you'll inevitably produce." "Hard work will do that," came a deep voice from the end of the hallway. Declan stood there, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert, assessing the situation with the practiced eye of a man accustomed to dangerous confrontations. He moved forward with measured steps until he stood beside Zara, not touching her but positioned protectively nonetheless. "Mr. Kessler," he greeted the older man with cool politeness, "I understand you've come a long way to see your daughter." Gilbert's gaze raked over Declan, taking in his working clothes, the calluses on his hands, the quiet confidence in his bearing. "And you must be the man who thinks himself worthy of a Kessler." "I know I'm not worthy of your daughter," Declan replied without hesitation. "But by some miracle, she loves me anyway, and I intend to spend my life trying to deserve that love." The simple honesty of the statement seemed to catch Gilbert off guard. He had clearly expected bluster or aggression, not this calm acknowledgement of his daughter's value. "Father," Zara interjected, "I have students waiting. This isn't the time or place for this discussion. If you wish to speak further, we can meet this evening at the boarding house. But I should warn you that my decision is made and nothing you say will change it." Gilbert studied her face, perhaps seeing for the first time the woman she had become, not the dutiful daughter he had tried to shape, but a person of strength and conviction who had forged her own path. "Very well," he conceded stiffly. "This evening, then. But don't imagine this matter is settled, Zara. I didn't come all this way to return empty-handed." With that, he turned and strode away, his posture rigid with barely controlled fury. When he was gone, Zara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Declan's arm came around her shoulders, offering silent support. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she assured him, surprised to find it was true. "He's exactly as I remembered, yet somehow less intimidating. Perhaps because I'm no longer the frightened girl who fled St. Louis." "You're the strongest person I know," Declan said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But you don't have to face him alone tonight. I'll be there." Zara smiled up at him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I'm counting on it." The confrontation that evening at the boarding house was tense, but ultimately decisive. Gilbert Kessler arrived with all his arguments marshaled: financial security, family obligation, the shame of abandoning a commitment, the social advantages of the match he had arranged. But each one fell flat against the united front presented by Zara and Declan. "I don't need Mr. Harrington's money," Zara explained patiently. "I earn my own living, and Declan's carpentry business is thriving. We have a home, a community that values us, and plans for the future that don't require anyone's charity or approval." "And what of your reputation?" Gilbert demanded. "Living in this backwater, married to a man with blood on his hands." "My reputation is based on my own actions and character," Zara replied firmly. "As for Declan's past, this is a place where people are judged by who they are now, not who they were or what mistakes they've made. It's one of the things I love most about Breckenridge." Throughout the exchange, Declan remained a steady presence at Zara's side, speaking when addressed, but otherwise allowing her to handle her father in her own way. His restraint impressed Gilbert despite himself. He had clearly expected a more aggressive response from the former ranger. "You really intend to go through with this?" he asked finally when all his arguments had been countered and his threats had fallen on deaf ears. "We do," Zara confirmed. "The wedding is on Saturday. You're welcome to attend if you wish." Gilbert's laugh was harsh and without humor. "Watch my youngest daughter throw away her future on a penniless drifter. I think not." "Then I wish you a safe journey home," Zara said, rising to indicate the conversation was over. "The stage leaves for Denver tomorrow morning." For a moment, something like regret flickered across Gilbert's features, a fleeting recognition, perhaps, of what he was losing by his intransigence. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold mask he had worn throughout their lives. "You've made your choice," he said, also standing. "I hope you don't live to regret it." "The only thing I would regret," Zara replied softly, "is not having the courage to follow my heart." Gilbert departed without another word, his rigid back eloquent of his disapproval. When the door closed behind him, Zara sagged slightly, the tension of the confrontation finally taking its toll. "He'll be on that stage tomorrow," Declan predicted, drawing her into his arms. "His pride won't allow him to stay and witness our happiness." "I know," Zara agreed, resting her head against his chest. "And I shouldn't care, he's been a shadow over my life for too long, but I can't help wishing that he could see beyond his own expectations," Declan suggested gently. "That he could be happy for you, even if your choices aren't what he would have made." "Yes," she admitted. "Is that foolish of me?" "No," Declan assured her. "It's human. We all want the approval of our parents, no matter how old we get or how impossible that approval might be to earn." Zara tilted her face up to his, love welling in her heart for this man who understood her so well. "Have I told you today how much I love you? You might have mentioned it," he replied with a smile, "but I never tire of hearing it." The next morning, Gilbert Kessler boarded the stage to Denver as predicted. Zara watched from a distance, a part of her still hoping for some sign, a last glance, a nod of acknowledgement, anything to suggest that their relationship wasn't severed beyond repair. But her father entered the coach without looking back, and as the stage pulled away in a cloud of dust, Zara forced herself to accept that some bridges, once burned, could not be rebuilt. "Ready?" Declan asked, appearing at her side as the stage disappeared around a bend in the road. "Yes," she said, turning away from the past and toward the future. "We have a wedding to prepare for." The following Saturday dawned clear and warm, the kind of perfect June day that seemed created specifically for celebrations. The small church was filled to capacity, the entire town having turned out to witness the union of their schoolteacher and the former Texas Ranger, who had become an integral part of their community. In a small room at the back of the church, Zara stood before a mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. Her dress, a creation of ivory silk and delicate lace that Mrs. Thompson and several other women had helped her make, fell in graceful lines from her shoulders to the floor. Her hair was arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck, with a few curls framing her face, and a crown of wildflowers completed the picture. "You look beautiful," came a voice from the doorway. Zara turned, startled, to find her middle sister, Catherine, standing there, a tentative smile on her face. "Catherine," Zara gasped, crossing the room in swift strides to embrace her. "What are you doing here? How did you know?" Father returned to St. Louis in a rage, Catherine explained, returning the hug. "He told us you were throwing your life away on some disreputable character, and that he'd washed his hands of you completely. It took me about 5 minutes to decide I needed to see this man who had apparently stolen my sensible sister's heart." Zara laughed through sudden tears. "And what do you think of him?" "You've met Declan." "Briefly, last night when I arrived," Catherine confirmed. "He seems not at all what Father described, Quite the opposite, in fact. He's wonderful, Zara said simply. He sees me, Catherine, really sees me for who I am. Catherine's eyes softened. Then I'm happy for you, and a little envious if I'm being honest. Before Zara could respond, there was a knock at the door and Mrs. Thompson peeked in. "It's time, dear," she announced. "Oh, you have company, my sister," Zara explained. "She's just arrived from St. Louis." "How lovely," Mrs. Thompson beamed. "Another female relative is just what we needed." "You can help give the bride away, my dear." Catherine looked startled, then pleased. "I'd be honored." As the organ began to play, announcing the start of the ceremony, Zara took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. "Ready?" she asked her sister. "I should be asking you that," Catherine replied with a smile. "But yes, I'm ready if you are." Together, they walked to the back of the church, where the rest of the bridal party, consisting of several of Zara's female students who had insisted on serving as flower girls and attendants, awaited. As the doors opened and the congregation rose, Zara's gaze traveled the length of the aisle to where Declan stood waiting, his expression transforming from nervous anticipation to awe as he caught sight of her. In that moment, all her doubts, all the lingering shadows of her father's disapproval, all the uncertainties about the future, melted away. There was only Declan, the man who had broken down a door to save her from the cold, who had wrapped her in his coat and eventually in his love. With Catherine at her side, Zara began the walk toward her future, each step bringing her closer to the life she had chosen, a life of love, respect, and the freedom to be herself, fully and without apology. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion, the minister's words, the exchange of vows and rings, the moment when Declan's lips met hers to seal their union. And then, they were turning to face the congregation as husband and wife, the cheers and applause washing over them like a benediction. The celebration that followed at the newly completed Yates home was everything Zara could have wished for: joyful, informal, filled with music and laughter, and the genuine goodwill of a community that had come to embrace both her and Declan as their own. Children ran playing through the rooms that still smelled of fresh-cut wood and new paint. Neighbors admired Declan's craftsmanship and Zara's decorating touches. Food and drink flowed freely, much of it contributed by townspeople eager to show their support. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the windows Declan had installed with such care, he found Zara standing on their front porch, taking a moment's respite from the festivities inside. "Happy?" he asked, coming to stand beside her, his arms slipping naturally around her waist. "Beyond words," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "It's perfect, Declan, all of it." They stood in comfortable silence, watching as the last rays of sunlight painted the mountains in shades of pink and gold. In the distance, the lights of Breckenridge began to twinkle as dusk deepened toward night. "Welcome home, Mrs. Yates," Declan murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. Zara turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face, marveling that this man, this strong, honorable, gentle man, was now her husband. "Thank you for finding me that night," she said softly, "for breaking down that door and wrapping me in your coat." "Best thing I ever did," Declan replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Saving you saved me too, Zara. You know that, don't you?" "I do," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, a future built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and a love that had begun in the harsh cold of winter but would flourish through all the seasons of their lives. 5 years later, on another perfect June day, Zara sat on the same porch, watching as Declan chased their 3-year-old son, William, around the yard. The boy's laughter, high and clear in the mountain air, mingled with the deeper chuckles of his father, creating a melody that never failed to warm Zara's heart. At her breast, their 6-month-old daughter, Elizabeth, nursed contentedly, her tiny hand curled around Zara's finger. The baby had Declan's blue eyes and Zara's dark hair, a perfect blend of them both, just as William had Zara's gray eyes and Declan's strong features. So much had changed in the 5 years since their wedding. Declan's reputation as a master carpenter had spread beyond Breckenridge, bringing commissions from as far away as Denver. Zara had continued teaching until William's birth, then had surprised herself by discovering she preferred being a mother to being an educator, at least for now. She still tutored occasionally and fully intended to return to the classroom once the children were older, but for the present, her focus was on her family. The house had expanded along with their family. Declan had added a nursery when they learned William was coming, and then another bedroom when Elizabeth was expected. The original structure remained the heart of their home, but it had grown organically to accommodate their needs, just as their love had deepened and matured with the passing seasons. Catherine had returned to St. Louis after the wedding, but had visited several times since, becoming a beloved aunt to the children and a bridge to the family Zara had left behind. Through her, Zara had learned that their eldest sister was now a widow, Mr. Harrington having finally succumbed to old age, leaving her wealthy but alone. There had been no word from their father, though Catherine reported that his health was failing and his businesses struggling. Sometimes, on quiet evenings like this one, Zara found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment, the fear that had driven her from St. Louis, the desperate cold of that winter night, the warmth of Declan's coat around her shoulders. So many small decisions, so many chances that might have gone differently. Had she not stepped out to retrieve that package, had the wind not caught her door, had Declan not heard her knock at the saloon. "Penny for your thoughts," Declan said, breaking into her reverie as he came up the porch steps, William slung upside down over his shoulder, giggling uncontrollably. "I was just thinking how fortunate we are," Zara replied, smiling at her husband and son. "How many things had to happen exactly as they did for us to be here now." Declan set William down, ruffling his hair before sending him off to play with his toys on the porch. Then he sat beside Zara, one arm around her shoulders, his other hand gently stroking Elizabeth's downy head. "I think about that too," he admitted, "especially when I watch them sleep. How close I came to never knowing this kind of happiness." "Do you ever regret settling here?" Zara asked, the question one she rarely voiced but occasionally wondered. "Giving up the freedom to roam, to see new places?" Declan's answer was immediate and certain. "Never. The only freedom that matters is the freedom to love and be loved. I found that with you, Zara. Everything else pales in comparison." She leaned against him, content in a way she had never imagined possible when she'd first arrived in Breckenridge, alone and uncertain. "I love you, Declan Yates." "And I love you, Zara Yates," he replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Always have since the moment you fell into my arms, half frozen but still fighting." William came running back to them, a wooden horse Declan had carved for him clutched in his small hand. "Papa, play," he demanded. "In a minute, son," Declan promised. "Papa's having a moment with Mama right now." The boy considered this, then nodded with the serious acceptance of a child who feels secure in his parents' love. "'Kay. But soon." "Soon," Declan agreed, watching as William returned to his imaginary world on the other end of the porch. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Zara thought again of that winter night that had changed everything. She had been locked out in the cold, desperate and afraid. A cowboy had broken down a door and wrapped her in his coat. And somehow, against all odds, they had found in each other not just warmth, but a love that would sustain them through all the seasons of their lives. It was, Zara reflected as she looked out over the home and family they had built together, the most beautiful story she could have imagined, and it was only just beginning.